What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey Milari. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the Frozen Four semifinals games from yesterday. I'll recap those two games, give my thoughts. Then I'll move on and talk about the NBA just for a second, talk about Steve Clifford stepping down as the head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. Then I'll talk about the Shohei, Ohtani, and Ippei Mizuhara situation with obviously the whole gambling scandal the last couple weeks. Reports did come out yesterday, so I'm going to clarify some things there. And then at the end, I'm going to give my thoughts on the Stefon Diggs trade from the Buffalo Bills to the Houston Texans. So we're covering every sport: hockey, NBA, MLB, and obviously covering some football there as well. So all four sports: hockey, football, basketball, baseball, which is pretty funny to see. But we'll start off with the Frozen Four semifinals, give a recap of that really quick. So Denver took down BU 2-1 last night in overtime. Tristan Bras with the game-winning goal for the Denver Pioneers. That's actually a second overtime game-winning goal of the tournament. Denver's second trip now to the finals in the last 3 years. They're a tough team to beat. That was their third straight 2-1 win, which it's pretty crazy to see because they had the best offense in the country, even heading into last night, 4.6 goals per game. But they only scored 2 goals yet again. 2-1 over UMass, 2-1 over Cornell, and now 2-1 over BU. Their defense is great, but just 6 goals for the team that had the best offense in the country, that's pretty crazy, just 6 goals in 3 games. But at the end of the day, it's still good enough to get a win. And their defense is very sound and very good. Matt Davis, I'll get into in just a minute, talking about him. But their defensemen are very sound as well. Very sound as well. Steve Clifford was only a freshman this year, had 11 goals, 38 assists, 49 points, and a plus 32 plus-minus differential. That's terrific. And then his brother, Shohei Clifford, 7 goals, 28 assists, 35 points. He's a junior. And then you also look at Sean Behrens, a guy that's been in the program now the last few years. I believe he's a junior. 4 goals, 26 assists, 30 points, a plus 24 plus-minus differential. He's been very good this year as well. He's been very good all 3 years at Denver. So they have a very sound defense, and that's a big reason they won that game yesterday. They make you play to their speed, and it's really interesting since BU plays with a lot of speed, and they play very fast, very quick, very aggressively. But while I was watching that game, I thought Denver was making BU play to their pace. BU had to play to Denver's pace. And before I get a little bit more into what Denver was doing, I'm going to talk about Matthew Caron, the goalie for BU. Just want to give him his flowers. He played phenomenal yesterday, in my opinion. Made some big-time saves on his back. Besides letting that shot go through his legs from Tristan Bras in overtime, I thought he played great. And honestly, that goal is something he's going to want back. That play is just devastating to lose on a 5-hole goal like that. But at the end of the day, he played very, very well and gave BU a chance to win that game. He gave them a chance to win. No better way to put it. So Matthew Caron does deserve his flowers. Made some big-time saves, as I said, and honestly, it reminded me of TJ Semptimphelter in the 2022 Beanpot. It was a losing effort for Semp, it was a losing effort for Caron, but they made some stellar saves, some ridiculous saves in those 2 games. But in the Beanpot in 2022, Semp lost 1-0. Offense couldn't get it done for Northeastern that day, but Semp did give the team a chance to win against BU. Dylan Peters had the only goal in that game, which he's still in BU now. And then yesterday's game, if you look at Caron's stat line, 27 saves and 29 shots. That was the best I've seen him play all year. Gave up just 2 goals. He gave that team a chance to win. But yesterday's game was just the 6th game all year that Macklin Celebrini didn't have a point. Despite 7 shots, 0 goals. And honestly, in those situations, you need Celebrini to score. He didn't score in the last 2 games for BU. No goals in either of the last 2 games. He had 2 assists in the regional final. But then yesterday's game, the Frozen Four, no goals, no assists. And you need him to show up. Yeah, the 7 shots, he had a chance on a couple of them. But considering he had 7 shots on goal, you'd like to score him at least once. Especially considering it's such a big game, you need you guys to elevate and step up in those moments. Not taking away from Celebrini, though, he had a terrific year, and he's going to be the first overall pick no matter what he did in those games. BU's lone goal came from Luke Tuck, a shorthanded goal in the first period. That was their only goal of the game. Credit to Denver. Honestly, they played very sound defense all night. Denver's defense was great all year, and they make you play at their pace. Matt Davis was great in net, 33 saves and 34 shots. As I mentioned in my preview of this game, being able to have a goalie that already won a national championship is a major advantage for Denver because the guy already knows what it takes to win. He's already been in those big moments, winning a couple years ago at Denver. He knows what it takes to win. He's not going to let the moment affect him and get him nervous. And we saw him give up just 1 goal in all 3 games so far in the tournament. So he's been great. And I do think BU was screwed, though. I'll say this. I'm not a BU fan. I was rooting for Denver in this game. I do think they were screwed, though. 4 power plays for Denver to 0 for BU. And at the end of the day, BU did have some trips and a bad boarding from Dylan Peterson in the 3rd period. So those calls should have been penalties. But there were some plays where I thought Denver could have gotten called for a penalty, and they didn't. Like when Lane Hudson was tripped in the 3rd period. That could have been called. It wasn't. It should have been called. It should have been called, in my opinion. And I'm not rooting for BU, but it should have been called. They were hosed without a couple of those calls going their way. Should they have gone called for 4 penalties? I mean, yeah, they were penalties at the end of the day, yes. But Denver should have gone called for a couple too, I think. So that is tough for BU to cope with when they didn't really get a chance in a power play. Denver, since the start of February, 14-2-1 record. So they're really getting hot at the right time. Even though their offense didn't show up yesterday, they still found a way to play sound defense. I thought it would be a game where they would wake up on offense. That ended up not being the case. I'm just still surprised they only have 6 goals in the tournament in 3 games. But I do think if their offense does wake up like I expect them to, I think it could be a tough game for BC versus Denver on Saturday. In my predictions before the Frozen Four tournament began, my prediction was BC versus Denver, so I had the finals matchup right. Now I'm going to move on and talk about BC defeating Michigan last night 5-0. This would be BC's 12th trip to the Frozen Four finals. An interesting part of the Frozen Four is that all 4 of these teams, Michigan, BU, BC, and Denver, were the 4 best offenses in the country heading into last night. Yet only 3 goals in the first game, 2-1 win for Denver, and 0 goals for Michigan in the second game. So defense was more of the storyline in the Frozen Four tournament here between these 4 teams than we expected it to. With the 4 best offenses, I think we expected probably more scoring, but we saw better defense than better offense so far in those 2 games yesterday. But of those 4 teams, BC's offense is the only one that really showed up. Winning that game 5-0 yesterday. Will Smith had 2 goals for the Eagles. Got the scoring going immediately. That BC freshman line is just absolutely terrific. Cutter Gauthier had yet again another goal, his 38th of the year. That actually is tied for the most goals in a single season in Division I hockey since the 2005-2006 season. So that is very impressive. What a year for Gauthier. That goal there for him gave BC a 3-0 lead. And BC never really looked back after that. After that goal, I thought the game was over. I thought Michigan had no chance once it was a 3-goal game. So that's a big goal there from Gauthier. Michigan's power play unit was 0 for 4 in the night. Honestly, was expecting more from them, considering they're the best power play in the country. But credit to Jacob Fowler, he was great in net. 32 saves and 32 shots. He was terrific in net. One thing I was impressed with Michigan was their speed. They were absolute jets. I was expecting them to get tied by the third period, but they were flying around all night. But the issue with that is this. By going at BC and going all in on offense, breakaways happen. So Michigan couldn't get back to stop Gauthier after he stole the puck there with the poke check. Ended up going all the way down the ice and getting a breakaway goal. That's the problem with playing aggressively sometimes. You take risks against a very good BC team. Sometimes you have to, but it can't cost you at the end of the day. And obviously it did. But I was impressed with Michigan's speed. And I feel like a lot of those Midwest teams play a different style of hockey than the Hockey East. Obviously Denver plays very sound defense. They play a little bit differently than BU does. They play a little bit differently than Michigan does. All of these teams play a little bit differently. Besides BU and BC play similar styles of hockey. But the other 2 teams in the Frozen Four, neither one of them really played similar styles of hockey to BC or BU. So a big win, obviously, for the Eagles. That makes it 15 wins in a row, the longest win streak by a Hockey East team since UMass's 14-game win streak on the road to their 2021 national title. Also, another accolade, Will Smith became the first player in Division I hockey to record 70 points in a single season since Kyle Connor did it for Michigan back in 2015-2016. So that's very impressive. And Smith has a chance to tack on to that as well. 71 for Connor back in 2015-2016 season. Smith has 70 right now. So he has a chance to get even more. So in the finals on Saturday, it'll be BC versus Denver. I'll preview that game probably on Saturday. Just one quick thing I want to mention. Denver has some vets from that championship team that won in 2022, but they are still a young team, the second youngest team in college hockey. And the craziest thing is this. The youngest team in college hockey is who they're going up against in the finals. BC is the youngest team in the country. Denver's the second youngest team in the country. So, going to be a great game. Obviously, going to be a fun one to watch. What I've noticed in college hockey, if you want to be one of the better teams, besides Quinnipiac winning last year with a lot of veterans, it seems like a lot of teams right now, especially in the Frozen Four tournament, a lot of them got in with a lot of young talent, a lot of freshman and sophomore talent. And that's what you need to try to win nowadays. It's no longer having third and fourth year guys come back. You need those first and second year guys that play with a lot of speed and play with a lot of firepower. Obviously, the vets help. Denver has gotten to where they are right now because they do have some veterans that came back, like Sean Behrens and Matt Davis. But at the end of the day, having young talent and young speed like BC has is definitely an advantage. And that's why you see a lot of teams in college hockey right now playing with young lineups and succeeding and making it all the way to the Frozen Four tournament. Some of the youngest teams in the college hockey landscape this year all made it into this tournament. Michigan State was young. Michigan was on the youngest side. BC, BU, Denver, Maine, all young teams. And they all made it in this year to the NCAA tournament. So young teams seem to be the way to go nowadays in college hockey. But at the end of the day, you do need veterans. You need Jacob Bengston on defense for BC. You need Jack Devine on offense for Denver, who actually had 27 goals this year, 29 assists, 56 points. He's only a junior, but still a veteran player on that team, though, at the end of the day. But you need veteran pieces if you want to win nowadays as well. I know I just mentioned a lot of young players and why teams are succeeding. Obviously, BC's freshman line has been huge for them this year. But you also do need veterans as well. And that's what Quinnipiac won last year. I feel like those veterans just gelled at the right time. The chemistry was elite. So we'll see what BC does versus Denver. I'll preview that game on Saturday at some point. So now I'm going to move on and talk about Steve Clifford stepping down as the head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. He's going to try to get into the front office, according to reports. It's been a frustrating last 2 seasons for him. You could tell he was fed up. This is his second stint in Charlotte as head coach. He was in Orlando for 3 years in between the 2 stints. Overall, in his NBA career, 339 wins, 460 losses, a .424 win percentage. This year, just 20 wins, 60 losses. And over the course of his career, a 5-16 playoff record. But honestly, he never really had too much to work with. He didn't really ever have enough to compete in the East. He seems like a good guy, just in a tough position trying to coach a struggling and rebuilding Charlotte team. I do wish him all the best in their front office. At the end of the day, though, that team this year wasn't going to go anywhere, healthy or not. I know they had their injuries, LaMelo Ball getting hurt. Obviously, trading Terry Rozier is tough. Trading Gordon Hayward, he was hurt at one point as well. But at the end of the day, this team was not built to compete in the East. And that isn't Steve Clifford's fault at the end of the day. So now I'm going to move on and talk about Shohei Ohtani and give an update on the situation with his former translator, Ippei Mizuhara. So the Department of Justice did a whole entire investigation. They found that Shohei Ohtani did not gamble and that he was robbed of not just $4 million, but $16 million he was robbed of by his former translator. His former interpreter was financing his gambling addiction, and the numbers that Ippei was gambling with were absolutely crazy. His average wager was $12,800. His largest wager, $160,000. His smallest wager, just $10. So that's obviously a lot less considering he was betting $160,000 at one point. His total losing bets, $182.9 million. His total winning bets, $142 million. And his net losses, $40.7 million he was down. $40.7 million. According to the reports, he never bet on baseball. And also, Shohei did not know anything about this. According to reports, Mizuhara changed the setting on Shohei's bank account so that Ohtani would not receive alerts or confirmations whenever transactions were happening with his bank account. And that obviously was a big part of Ippei continuing to gamble because he had the money to do so because he was taking it from Shohei, according to reports. And according to the investigation, there was a text going from Ippei Mizuhara to his bookie in 2022, and Ippei stated this: "I'm terrible at this sports betting thing, huh? LOL." And at the end of the day, he was doing this for over 2 years. He did this from December 2021 to January 2024, meaning he was placing around 25 to 26 bets per day on average since he had 19,000 total wagers over 25 or 26 months. That means he was averaging just about 25 or 26 bets per day. That is absolutely crazy. And obviously, $40 million down, he wasn't stopping anytime soon. If he didn't get caught, he probably would have continued to do this. And honestly, I feel bad for Shohei. I know in my original episode, I said I didn't think Shohei was gambling, which I was right about that. I didn't think Shohei was gambling. He had nothing to gain, and obviously he didn't really follow any American sports, so it didn't really make any sense for him to gamble. I know his Angels teammates said he didn't really follow any other sports, so it made sense for Shohei not to gamble. But I did think at the time when I recorded that first episode, I thought he was just trying to help out his friend. But after yesterday's investigation, it looks like just Shohei had no clue about this. And when you have so much money coming in, and obviously he's making so much money in the money off the field in endorsements, and obviously making a lot of money last year with the Angels, getting the largest contract in arbitration history in the MLB last year with $30 million from the Angels, although Juan Soto did break that this year with $31.5 million. But he had a lot of money coming in, obviously, in endorsements, making all the money he did off the field, and then getting a $700 million contract with the Dodgers. I know most of that, if not all of it, is backloaded. I think it was like 97% is backloaded. He's getting that years away since they threw it down the line. So with all that money being deferred, I know it's 97% of a $700 million contract will be deferred. He's only making $2 million a year, and then the other $68 million per year is being sent down the line. Even with not all that money coming in, obviously from his salary until years and years away, he was still making so much money in endorsements this year. So it's easy, I guess, to not really see all of that money that's leaving your account, especially when you're not getting notifications since Ippei supposedly changed the settings on Shohei's bank account. But after all the investigation reports came out, I do feel really bad for Shohei. I felt bad for him before, but I feel even worse for him now. Because now it seems like he had no clue about it. And that just makes it even worse. Because if he was trying to help out his friend, obviously it's still illegal since sports gambling is illegal in California. I get that. It was an illegal sports book. But if he was just trying to help out his friend, it wasn't like he was doing anything malicious. He was just trying to help out his friend at the end of the day. But when you're being robbed from your friend, that is just much, much worse. A much worse feeling. And I know the popular thing on the internet is to say Shohei was gambling. but I don't agree with it. I know it's a trendy thing to do on the internet to say Shohei was gambling and it wasn't Ippei and Ippei's the fall guy. But at the end of the day, Shohei had nothing to gain from this situation. And even though it's a trendy thing to say that Shohei was gambling, I just don't agree with it. So I never really promoted that here on this podcast. And my stance stayed the same the entire time. I never thought Shohei was gambling. But whether or not he was trying to help out his friend, that was obviously up for debate. I thought he was trying to help his friend before this report came out yesterday. But at the end of the day, now it seems like he was being robbed from his former translator. So that's obviously a lot for Shohei to handle, and I do feel bad for him. It's obviously a big distraction for him right now. He has to think about this while still trying to play the game of baseball, but luckily it's early in the season. There's still a long way to go, so it's not like this happened during the playoffs, and that was a major distraction, let's say, in October, but at the end of the day, Shohei was the victim in this situation. I do feel really bad for him, but obviously a long way to go in the season, and hopefully the Dodgers can find a way to win the World Series. That would obviously be great for Ohtani, getting him a chance to play in the playoffs, something that the Angels could never do, unfortunately. So now I'm going to move on, and just to make sure I was going to cover every sport in this episode, I had to make sure I was covering something in the NFL here, and last week, a big trade went down between the Texans and the Bills. I was not able to record on it, so I'm going to give my thoughts on it now. Last week, the Houston Texans made a blockbuster trade with the Buffalo Bills to land wide receiver Stefon Diggs. The trade breakdown is this. The Bills got a 2025 second-round pick via Minnesota, while the Texans got Stefon Diggs, a 2024 sixth-round pick, and a 2025 fifth-round pick. Also, keep in mind this, Stefon Diggs' contract was altered with 4 void years being created, and rather now it being a 3-year deal left on his contract, it's now just a 1-year revised contract. So now the Houston Texans only have him for 1 year, so obviously now it's more of a gamble, but the contract was altered after the trade went through, and the Houston Texans only have him for 1 year before he is a free agent, so now they're probably going to try to look for a contract extension at some point. But as for the Bills and what they lost this offseason, adding Stefon Diggs to that list is really tough. They already lost a lot of talent before this trade. Safety Jordan Poyer, cornerback Tre'Davious White, center Mitch Morse, wide receiver Gabe Davis, linebacker Terrell Dodson, linebacker Leonard Floyd. Also, Micah Hyde's a free agent, so that's another loss in their secondary potentially. They have a lot of holes to fix in their secondary, and now at wide receiver, losing their top 2 receivers. And every single year, it seems like it's the Bills' year, but I don't think they will be a favorite out of the AFC this year. I wasn't really high on them in the last few years, but I don't think many people are going to take them to get out of the AFC this year like we've seen the last few years. Without Stefon Diggs, that's a major loss. And honestly, they shouldn't be a favorite. Every year, it's the Bills' year, and they always find a way to come up short. Too many losses this offseason. I think it's going to catch up to them. I think their chance to win was honestly within the last 2 to 3 years. And if you look at Josh Allen's touchdown numbers from last year, he threw 29 touchdowns last year. 15 of those touchdowns came from Diggs or Davis. Both of those guys will be gone now. So those 2 guys accounted for 45% of Josh Allen's passing yards in 2023 and also accounted for 15 of his 29 touchdowns. That's pretty crazy numbers. 45% of Josh Allen's passing yards went to those 2 guys this season, and then they also accounted for 15 of his 29 passing touchdowns. So I do think Josh Allen will be taking a step back this year. I know it's a trendy thing to say now considering he just lost Stefon Diggs, but I've always said on this podcast, I thought Stefon Diggs was a big major reason Josh Allen made that step up, and I thought he needed Stefon Diggs more than Stefon Diggs needed him. Yes, Stefon Diggs became a number 1 option in this Bills offense, but Diggs also transformed Josh Allen's game as well. And I could tell Diggs was frustrated with falling short every single year with the Bills. So I've said numerous times in this podcast that I thought Diggs would request a trade at some point, and now he goes to a really good and young Texans team. But I've always thought Stefon Diggs needed Josh Allen less than Josh Allen needed him. I've always thought Diggs was the guy that elevated Josh Allen's game, and I've always said every quarterback needs a number 1 receiver. Josh Allen had Stefon Diggs. Patrick Mahomes had Tyreek Hill, now he has Travis Kelce. I know Kelce's the tight end, but still his number 1 target. You look across the NFL, Joe Burrow has Jamar Chase. Tua Tagovailoa has Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Jared Goff is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Matt Stafford has Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. You need a number 1 receiver in today's day in the NFL. And that's why I feel like Daniel Jones was never given a fair shot here in the Giants offense. They never had a number 1 receiver for him. Yeah, Kenny Golladay got signed to a big contract. I wasn't a big fan of the contract when it was signed. And now looking back, it's one of the worst contracts the Giants have ever signed. But Josh Allen, I do think, is going to take a step back this season. I've always thought he was overrated. I always thought the Bills were overrated, honestly. Considering every year they were picked to win the Super Bowl and they just never were able to do so. They were never able to beat the Chiefs when it mattered most. It's really hard to expect them to take that step up now with all those losses this season. So you'd have to imagine the Bills take a wide receiver in the draft at this point. Maybe Keon Coleman. I think he'd be great in that offense. The Bills will now carry $30 million in dead money from the Stefon Diggs trade. As for the other side of this deal, the Houston Texans, what a rebuild they've had. A truly miraculous rebuild. So credit to their GM, Nick Caserio. He has done wonders for this team over the last 2 years. Obviously getting C.J. Stroud last year in the draft, and now making a lot of splashes this offseason. Wide receiver Stefon Diggs. Now you pair him with Tank Dell and Nico Collins. Adding Danielle Hunter, a great pass rusher who will be huge for their pass rush. And then also running back Joe Mixon, who will help them in the pass-catching game a ton. And then they also add 2 cornerbacks who were both former top picks in the first round that haven't really panned out yet, but they're worth the gamble. And that's cornerbacks Jeff Okudah and C.J. Henderson. As I said, both former top picks. They haven't panned out yet, but it is worth the gamble. It's worth the gamble to see if those guys can live up to the hype they had at the draft. Obviously, things haven't really worked out for them in the NFL with injuries and obviously underperforming, but there's always a chance they turn back time and play like they were supposed to when they were drafted. So it's worth the gamble. Maybe one of those guys turns back time. But the Texans' rebuild has been special. And it all started with getting the quarterback right. I praised C.J. Stroud a lot in the draft last year, and I said before the season began that I thought he'd be a star, and I thought he'd impress right away. And this year in the draft, my guy is Michael Penix, who's a pure passer. I think he's going to be great right away in the NFL. I think he's league ready. So if you look at this Texans offense, you got C.J. Stroud, Joe Mixon, Stefon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, and they're probably still going to add an offensive lineman or two to help C.J. Stroud in the draft. As for the Bills, they lost a lot of talent. I do think this team regresses. I think Josh Allen regresses a little as well. Their top 3 receivers right now are Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakur, and Matt Collins. And I think Shakur can be a good receiver. I do. I think he could be like a Gabe Davis type. But they still don't have a number 1. Curtis Samuel probably isn't a number 1. He's more of a wide receiver 2. So I'd expect the Bills to add Brian Thomas or Xavier Legette or Keon Coleman or Devontae Walker. I'd expect them to add one of those receivers in the draft. Go out and get a bigger receiver that can try to add to that offense since they need help at receiver right now. But for the Texans, it really started with getting the quarterback right. And like I said, I think Michael Penix is that guy in this year's draft. Of the top 4 quarterbacks right now, the talk is all around Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and J.J. McCarthy. I don't really buy into J.J. McCarthy really much at all. I don't see first-round talent in him, which I'm going to give another mock draft probably within the next week. Obviously, the NFL draft now is less than 2 weeks away. I'm not as high on Caleb Williams. I think he's overrated. Of those 4 guys, I think Jaden Daniels is the best quarterback. But out of everybody in the draft, I really do think Michael Penix is the best quarterback. So we'll see what happens there. As for this trade, obviously Houston's a major winner here, getting another receiver to help C.J. Stroud. But I also think there's another winner, and that's a team that wasn't even involved in the trade. And that's the New York Jets. I think this is their division to lose. They were going all in regardless this season, but the door in the AFC East is opening up even more for them, considering the Bills lost so much talent, and the Dolphins lost a lot too. The Dolphins lost Jerome Baker, Xavier Howard, Andrew Van Ginkel, and other pieces as well. As for the Jets, they added Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, and Mike Williams. There's injury issues with all of them. Smith, still a great talent, but hasn't played a full season since 2015. But he did play in all 7 Cowboys playoff games since then, so he has been healthy when it mattered most. Morgan Moses, a great add to the offensive line. He is older, though, but he will be an upgrade at right tackle. Typically healthy, but is an older player, so there is a little bit more of a risk there. They also traded Hassan Reddick. They only had to give up a conditional 3rd-round pick in 2026. This is a guy that had 11 sacks last year and double-digit sacks in 4 straight seasons. He also was an All-Pro in 2022. That's a great add to a Jets defense that needed some help in the pass rush. They did lose a little bit of pass rush in the offseason, but now they add and try to address it. As for the Eagles, they do need to address their defensive line probably a little bit as well. As for Mike Williams, though, the issue for him is staying healthy. But he does add size and a skill at 50-50 balls for Rodgers to use. They needed a 50-50 receiver, and that is that guy in that offense. He played in just 3 games last year for the Chargers, 19 catches, 249 yards, and a touchdown. But from 2019 to 2022, he played in 59 games with 3,800 total yards, 20 total touchdowns, including a career year in 2021 with 1,145 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 76 catches. Definitely a solid add for the Jets at a low cost. Obviously, this is an all-in year. There's injury issues with a lot of players on this team, especially when you look at the offensive line. Tyron Smith's had a lot of injuries. Elijah Vera Tucker's been hurt. So there is risk, but it is an all-in year. Aaron Rodgers, who knows how many more years he's going to play? They're going to try to go all in this season. And this is their year to win the AFC East. And this is the year to try to win in the AFC. I think the Jets will make the AFC Championship. That's just a guess right now, but I do think they have what it takes to make it to the AFC Championship. And we'll see what happens in the draft. There's still a lot more that can happen until then. We'll see what they do with the 10th overall pick. They could add a tight end in Brock Bowers, which I don't really value the tight end enough to take a tight end that high. Or you could add an offensive lineman, Olu Fashanu, or if Joe Alt falls, or even Talizi Fuaga. There are options for the Jets here to add to this team. And I do think they have what it takes to compete in the AFC. You need Aaron Rodgers to stay healthy, though. You need him to stay healthy. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good one, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.